Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today's video is going to be all about my Xbox 360 game collection. I really enjoyed playing games on the 360, and now that we know that the upcoming Xbox Series X console is going to have near 100% backwards compatibility with all previous Xbox generations, well, now is the perfect time to dig into some of these games, especially when you consider a lot of these are still really cheap. Let's take a look. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention that I have about 180 Xbox 360 games, but I'm not going to try to go through those one by one because that would make for a very long video. Instead, I've tried to kind of group them together, and then I'm going to show you some of the highlights or ones that I think are kind of interesting. And since we're talking about an Xbox console, perhaps it's only appropriate that we start with first-person shooters, and you see a bunch of them that I have in my collection here. I played a ton of great first-person games on the Xbox 360, and including Body Count here. This was a game I was not aware of initially. I don't think it sold very well, but I guess it is a spiritual successor to the game Black. That was a game that came out on the original Xbox. I believe it's also on the PS2. A really cool first-person shooter, and here is its sequel. I recently picked up a copy of Crysis 3 on the Xbox 360 simply because it was so cheap. Now, I haven't played these games a ton, but I'm very familiar with the Crysis series on the PC. That's where that famous question comes from when you're getting new hardware. You basically ask the question, will it run Crysis? Now, for some reason, it seems like the series kind of fell off after a while, but I played a little bit of it on the 360 recently, just in the last couple weeks, and it looks pretty good. It's not getting a great frame rate here, but it looks pretty decent. So if you played it, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Now, here's a game I did play and finish probably at least twice. That is called Singularity. This is a really cool first-person shooter on the 360. And the reason why this is so cool is because it is a shooter, but it also mixes kind of survival horror. It has this time element to it where you basically can manipulate time in really interesting ways. It's such a cool game. It's a total hidden gem. I think I've covered it several years ago. So, and usually you can find it fairly cheap. If you haven't played this game and you like games like BioShock, you got to check out Singularity. Here's a game that really blew me away when I first played it, and that's because it was a total surprise at how good it was. This, of course, is Syndicate. Now, this is a reboot of the classic Syndicate series that you may have played back on the PC by Bullfrog. Now, that was a real-time tactical game, but this, of course, is a first-person shooter, and this one's made by Starbreeze Studios, and it's a really decent first-person shooting game. I was really pleasantly surprised by this. Now, it's not going to win any awards or anything like that, but it's way better than you might expect. So if you haven't played it, check it out. And then here are some more first-person shooters, some of the more common ones that people think about when they think of the Xbox 360. Of course, you've got that triple pack of Call of Duty right there, which is a nice little package. Plus, Battlefield Bad Company 2 was a game I really enjoyed. The single player on that was quite amazing and quite a surprise. And then you've got some other ones here that are really obvious, like the Halos, the Far Cries, the Orange Box. It's kind of interesting. People forget that King Kong was actually a first-person shooter, although it's kind of more of a survival horror game. And then you have Perfect Dark Zero. Now, that game was heavily hyped and, obviously exclusive to the Xbox 360 at the time. And I just couldn't get into it. And I don't know what it is. It just feels a little hollow, a little soulless. And so, I don't know. I think maybe my expectations were a little bit too high with that game. But, it's part of the Xbox 360 legacy, so you got to have it in the collection. It was on the Xbox 360 that I really dove heavily into the rhythm genre of games. I played all of the Guitar Heroes, all of the Rock bands, plus you see some of the extra ones here too, like Band Fuse and also Rock of the Dead. And sometimes people ask me, why don't I cover these more on my channel? And the answer, unfortunately, is copyright claims. I would love to do it, but It's incredibly tough to cover these games and play the licensed music that's included on here without getting or triggering a copyright claim. Now, sometimes you can fight those and sometimes you'll win, but it's a real pain in the butt. And it's really sad too, because this generation of gaming had amazing games here. I played the drums, I played the bass, I played the guitar. Occasionally I would sing badly, so lots of great memories playing these. As a game collector, one of the things I like about this generation is that occasionally they would put out these physical collections of multiple games. And so you see a couple of them here that I picked up over the years, including the Dreamcast collection, as well as the Serious Sam collection. You have a couple collections or triple packs down there from Square Enix. And then you have this really cool Xbox Live Arcade collection here, where you have Trials HD, Limbo, and Explosion Man. And I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I absolutely love the Trials series, and I believe this is the first one. I could be wrong about that, but it's just such a fun game to play. So yeah, these are really cool to have. I love a good scare, and during this generation there were a bunch of great horror games released for it, so you see some of them here from my collection. Now, this is a mix of survival horror as well as just plain horror, and maybe something in between. I'm kind of taking some liberties here, but I felt like these all kind of fit together at least a little bit. During this time, it seemed like Konami was taking some chances with the Silent Hill series, some of them better than others, but here you see Downpour on the 360, and this was an interesting one. I think it's actually a fairly decent Silent Hill game. You play as a guy who is in prison, who is being transferred over to another area and goes off the road and basically ends up in the Silent Hill area. It's a return to the classic style of Silent Hill, and I think for the most part it works pretty well. It's a little bit on the predictable or boring side, but I still enjoy it. Now, Dead Space 1 and 2 are some of my all-time favorite horror games, bar none. Both 1 and 2, I think, are masterpieces at dread and just jump scares and horror. They're absolutely amazing. While these look and play fantastic today, it would be really cool if EA would go back and maybe remaster these for the next generation of consoles. If they want money, I think that would be a great idea, because I know fans like me would love to replay these. I mean, that would just be awesome on the Switch. During this time, we got a couple Condemned games as well as a couple Fear games, and both of these are pretty fun series, and it's just kind of weird that they just sort of ran out of gas. They just kind of faded off, which is really sad. Shadows of the Damned is probably not really a horror game, at least in the traditional sense, because it's so over the top, it's so silly at times, but it definitely has a lot of horror elements in it. It's definitely more of a Quentin Tarantino or Robert Rodriguez style of horror, where again, it's just completely over the top, sometimes silly, but it's absolutely awesome. This is such a cool game. If you haven't played it, definitely check it out. And I definitely wanted to mention the Chronicles of Riddick Assault on Dark Athena. The reason why this is really cool is because it is the original Xbox game, Escape from Butcher Bay, remade with a new game engine as well as some new content. So if you love that original game, which was awesome by the way, you got to definitely check this out too. And then I have to mention Alan Wake, which is one of the few collector's editions that I have for the 360. I don't know why I didn't get very many of them, but this is the game to get because it's a really cool version of it. If you haven't played Alan Wake, it's a survival horror game. You play as an author, and many times it feels like a love letter to classic Stephen King, and it's both narrative style as well as just the whole setting of it. It's definitely really cool. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I went to Japan in 2019, and while there, one of my goals was to try to find as many of the shoot 'em ups that came out on the Xbox 360. Many of these were exclusive to Japan, and so you see a bunch of them here, and I have to say, it was very exciting to find some of these because you never find them in the States, and so many of these were on my bucket list. And what's cool is that many of these are collector's editions, so they come with art books and soundtracks and multiple games on the disc, as well as videos to teach you how to get through some of the more difficult parts. But that's not to say that we didn't get some good ones in the States. You see some of them that we got here, including Death Smiles. Now, that wide Death Smiles box right there actually has a faceplate for your original Xbox 360. That's why it's actually wide like that. So that's a really cool version. Of course, I had to have a bunch of Rockstar games. I do love Rockstar. I play pretty much everything that they release. I will say that Grand Theft Auto 4 was kind of a disappointment at the time. It just felt a little samey, but Red Dead Redemption was fantastic, as well as LA Noire. And then I do want to mention Bully, because originally I played that on the PS2, but the Xbox 360 got the Scholarship Edition, and I know a lot of people out there are just dying for a sequel to that. It was definitely unlike every other Rockstar game that was released at the time, and I do think it would be pretty cool for them to go back, but part of me also thinks, don't ruin it. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes when you want a sequel and then you get it and it's a disappointment. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if they ever go back. Here's some more games that I really enjoyed playing on the Xbox 360, including Tomb Raider, which I don't know if that's the second or third time that they've tried to reboot Tomb Raider, but they definitely got it right. That was a really fantastic game to play. As well as Hitman Absolution. And I know that me saying that just pisses off a bunch of people, but it's true. I don't know. There's just something really campy and fun and over the top about the Absolution game. It wasn't a fan favorite at the time because it was such a departure from how the Hitman games played up to that point, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was, again, you know, you've kind of picked it up from the previous games I've talked about. I like games that inject a little bit of that humor in there, a little bit of that Quentin Tarantino absurdness. So yeah, this game definitely ticked all those boxes. Also, a huge shout out to Spec Ops: The Line. I've covered this game years ago in a Hidden Gems video, and it's so deserving because it's a third-person game, but it really deals with the horrors and the psychology of war in a really interesting way. I'm not going to spoil it because there's a lot of videos out there. We'll talk about what goes on in this game, but I do want to point out that the level design in this is really special. I mean, it's just so cool how they deal with sand and how the weather and the wind and all that sort of works into this game. It has nothing to do necessarily with the story. I'm just saying that this is a really well-made game, and if you haven't played it and you like these kind of games, you should definitely check it out. Also during this time period, we got a bunch of excellent Tom Clancy Splinter Cell games. Now, I don't know if I would claim that they necessarily rebooted the series. Maybe Ubisoft would consider that, but it really felt like that they took the series to the next generation of hardware and really utilized it in great ways. I mean, to me, these games still felt like Splinter Cell. I know that some people really prefer the originals. I definitely really enjoyed the originals on the Xbox too, but these were really fun. And it's kind of a bummer that, again, we haven't seen a proper one in a long time, and I'd love to get some new ones because I did enjoy these a lot. Next up, you have a bunch of games based on licenses, and of course you've got Ghostbusters, G.I. Joe, Batman, Star Wars, The Bourne Identity, but then you get to James Bond, and I do want to pause for a second and talk about how awesome Bloodstone is. To me, Bloodstone is one of the greatest James Bond games of all times because it does so many things really well. To start off with, it's an original story, so it's not tied to a movie, so you go into it and you don't know what's going to happen, which is pretty fun. Also, it's got Daniel Craig, which is one of the best versions of James Bond. Plus, it's a third-person cover-based shooter, so it reminds me of Everything or Nothing on the PS2, which, again, is another one of my favorites. And this was developed by Bizarre Creations. Now, the reason why that's kind of interesting is because they also made the Project Gotham Racing series, and that means that all of the racing levels in this game are really good. They're some of the highlights of it. It's just a really well-rounded game. I highly recommend it. I also have Afro Samurai, which is a really cool beat 'em up based on an anime that stars Samuel Jackson. There's a lot of attitude in this game. It's hilarious and also really great graphics. as well as Warhammer Space Marine. This is another game that I've covered in a previous Hidden Gems video a couple years ago. Total surprise. If you are familiar with the tabletop game and you're familiar with Space Marine, you're going to be really surprised by this game because it's excellent and it seems like nobody knows about it. You guys know me, and if it's a system that I collect for, of course it's going to have awesome racing games, and the Xbox 360 had tons of them, including Blur, which is a game that unfortunately kind of flew under the radar and didn't sell very well when it first came out. Maybe it's the title, maybe it's the cover, looks kind of generic, but that's a real shame because basically what this game is, it's a mix of Need for Speed and Mario Kart. So you have all the look and feel of Need for Speed, as well as the cars and all the details and all that, but then you pick up power-ups like in Mario Kart. And honestly, this is amazing. I have it on the 360. I bought it on the PS3. I would buy it again if they would do an HD remaster. It's so killer. And then here's a racing game I picked up fairly recently, but I had no idea what it was. It was just kind of cheap, so I was like, I'll take a chance on it. That, of course, is Crash Time Autobahn Pursuit. Now, I think this game is based on a German television show, but I could be wrong about that. Now, I haven't played a ton of this yet, but from what I can tell, it's an arcade game that has a little bit of realistic elements to it. So, for instance, in the levels I played so far, you're a police officer and you're trying to get to a destination somewhere. Maybe it's the precinct or something, but you'll be racing through like traffic, like heavy traffic, and you can't hit the cars, but yet it's an arcade game. So it's really interesting because, yeah, you'll get points knocked off if you actually take out pedestrians or other cars that happen to be on the road, and they're everywhere. So I don't know much about this game. If you played it before or if there are other games in the series that you think I should check out, definitely let me know. And then Split Second is a game that I first played on the Xbox 360 and really fell in love with it because it's an arcade racing game very similar to Burnout, but it's in the future, so it has this kind of post-apocalyptic vibe to it. But the cool thing is that you can affect the environment and also sometimes change the levels, which is a really cool thing that they added to this. It adds a total bit of chaos and mayhem to your racing. At times it can be kind of frustrating, but it looks and plays awesome. A total hidden gem. And then here are some more racing games that are probably more common that a lot of you are going to be familiar with, so I won't spend a lot of time on them. Now, one game I did want to mention is Test Drive Ferrari Racing Legends. Now, to be fair, when this game was released, it didn't get amazing reviews. It was pretty much in the middle, because if you're not into Ferraris, there's probably not much for you here. But one of my all-time favorite racing games was Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed. And just like that game, this covers the entire history of the Ferrari franchise, from the very beginning all the way to the models that were current when this was released. So that's really fun for a Ferrari fan like me. Plus, I also like how when you start those races, it actually starts kind of in this grainy, black and white sort of style, and then it fades into color. It's pretty cool. Here's another random assortment of Xbox 360 games in my collection, and this is just kind of a mishmash of lesser known games, perhaps. I was looking for stuff that really was probably under $10 for the most part. Now, I do want to point out John Woo presents Stranglehold, and I played this game when it first came out, and it kind of blew me away because you play as John Woo, who is a total badass, and basically in this game, you are flying through the air, 2 guns loaded, shooting dudes in the face, blowing up watermelons, sliding over tables. It is just so much fun, so over the top. It gets a little monotonous over the game, so it's not a perfect game by any means, but again, you can pick it up usually pretty cheap, and it's a ton of stupid fun. Here's some random games I put together because I didn't quite know where to put them in other categories. They're kind of all over the place a little bit here. Of course, you have Metal Gear Rising, Anarchy Reigns, Fusion Frenzy, one of the few fighting games in my collection for the 360, Dead or Alive 4, Chrome Hounds, Civilization Revolution, Beautiful Katamari, even a football game that I think a friend gave me. But I did want to point out Bomberman Act Zero, not because this is a good Bomberman by any means, but it is a bit of an oddity because it is exclusive on the 360. And, well, a lot of fans of this series pretty much disavow this game. It's kind of interesting because, as you can see here, it has a new graphic style, which is a little bit kind of more hardcore and extreme, which is very different than the other ones. Plus, it just wasn't really well made. It had long load times. Just wasn't very much fun to play, really. So anyway, it's just kind of a weird one here in my collection. But a game that is really fun is Overlord. Now, I've covered this game in the past on a previous Hidden Gems video, and I definitely stand by that because it's a real-time kind of tactical game where you control a bunch of minions to do your bidding. It's really fun to play as the bad guy, controlling these minions. It's a little bit of RPG elements in here. Yeah, definitely a lot of fun. Here you have a bunch of third-person games that I kind of grouped together. Of course, you have the original Gears of War 1 and 2, classics, obviously, as well as Bayonetta, Binary Domain. But I want to point out Enslaved Odyssey to the West. Enslaved was a game that unfortunately got ignored when it was released, but it is a really well-made third-person action-adventure game with a lot of platforming, a lot of great combat, really excellent characters, the level design. So much about this game is so memorable. I feel like people are starting to catch on that this game is really good. This is another one that if you haven't played it yet, you definitely should. Also, I want to mention Crackdown. When this game originally came out, I absolutely loved it. It was so much fun pretending to be a superhero-like character, jumping around from building to building, just trying to collect stuff. It was really, really innovative and fun at the time. Didn't really get too much into the sequel, and then I just kind of fell off a little bit. Here are some more random games, including Bullet Witch, and then this one called Anchandabara. I don't know. Bikini Squad. I mean, this game is in my collection because Paul found it, I believe, in a GameStop and bought it for me because of the cover, but then he's the one who actually played and beat it. Moving on, we have Viking. Wet is a really interesting game. Bulletstorm is pretty fun, but I do want to mention and point out Brutal Legend because people ask me if I played that game, and I actually bought it when it came out, so I had it from day one. And initially, I absolutely loved that game. I love the potential of it. It has one of the best game soundtracks of all time. The track list of rock and metal is second to none. So many great deep cuts in there and popular tunes. It's fantastic. I do really like the game up until you have to do the real-time strategy stuff. That's the part of it I don't really like, but everything else I love. I did play a ton of role-playing games on the Xbox 360, and there's a good variety of them, including these right here, but I do want to point out the three at the top there, which is Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey, and Infinite Undiscovery. And the reason why that's really interesting is because Microsoft was very key in trying to fix the mistake that they had happen on the original Xbox, and that was a lack of Japanese RPGs. And so these three games, I remember, came out fairly close to the launch of the Xbox 360, and basically that was to entice people to try to play more JRPGs on the system, and most of these are pretty well regarded. And I do want to mention an RPG that I loved at the time, that is Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning. This is such a well-made and fun game. It's got amazing graphics, it's got a great world, it's got a story by R.A. Salvatore, great combat engine. It just hit all the right notes, and it's awesome to learn that it's going to be getting a remaster very soon. I can't wait. I also want to mention the two Fable sequels that came out on the 360. Now, in my mind, I think Fable 2 is pretty much a masterpiece. I love everything about that game, from the world to the characters to the side quests and all the weird things that you could do in that game that had nothing to do with the main story quest. Overall, I played it multiple times. And then when it comes to Fable 3, it's not a bad game. It's just that it was kind of more of the same. And so I really wasn't into it as much. I will say, though, I'm hoping that Microsoft brings back Fable for the Xbox Series X. That would be a system seller for me. More RPGs that I really enjoyed on the 360, including Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. That's actually the reason why I bought a 360, because I wanted to play that game. Then, of course, Skyrim came out, and then that was amazing. I really, really loved the first 2 Dragon Age games. You see Dragon Age Origins as well as the DLC Awakening there, Dragon Age 2, Fallout 3. But I do want to point out Alpha Protocol. So that's by Obsidian. It's an RPG. Basically, it's like a James Bond RPG. And it's as awesome as it sounds. Now, at the time, it was known for being kind of unfinished and broken. But despite that, I still played it, and I still think it's really, really good. So if you haven't played Alpha Protocol, either watch a Let's Play of it or play it yourself because it is really memorable. It's very cool. It's on the 360 that I played the Mass Effect trilogy, and you see all 3 of them here. That last one there actually is part of the collector's edition. It's got a art book and stuff like that in there. But absolutely some of my all-time favorite RPGs, especially the second one. I think that they really nailed all the gameplay mechanics. They fixed a lot of things that I wasn't crazy about in the original game. But the thing is, the original game sets up the entire story. It's where a lot of these characters are introduced. And then, of course, you have the third game, which wraps it all up. It's a little bit controversial, but I still love it. I would love to see this get remastered by EA to next-gen consoles or the Switch. That would be amazing. All right, guys, well, it's a quick look at my Xbox 360 game collection, but I know there's going to be many more games you guys will probably recommend I pick up. Please post a comment down below, especially considering we all know that Microsoft has announced that the Xbox Series X will have pretty much full backwards compatibility. That's pretty amazing. So going to be interesting to see how that all works out. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.